This is a work session. In the work session today, we have 2 items. Please make sure that you silence all cell phones, electronic devices, and adhere to social distancing and face covering requirements, whatever they may be, today. And with that, we're going to start the work session right off. There is Rick, right in the front row. Thank you very much. And Rick, let's talk about natural lands protection.
Mr. Chairman, could you do the Pledge of Allegiance? Are we doing that this afternoon?
That's in the afternoon, sir.
Okay.
We
can do it
could, if
twice,
you
though.
want to.
Sure.
I have no problem in doing it.
Whatever you think is appropriate.
Let's have a pledge of allegiance, everybody. Nope.
Maybe have Mr. Durr lead us.
I think he's already
Good
ready.
idea.
Rick, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You are welcome. Is there any other comments before we start this meeting? Okay. Then let's move right along. Rick, go right ahead, please.
Good morning. For the record, Richard Durr, Leisure Services Director for Seminole County. Before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to acknowledge a few folks that worked on this one primarily. So Sheridan Williams from Leisure Services, our Special Projects Manager, Jim Doobie, who you all know, our Natural Lands Program Manager, and lots of help from the County Attorney's Office with Paul Chipok and Robbie McHugh. So we thank them for their efforts in helping to coordinate this effort coming forward. So.
And several citizens who weighed in.
I've got some more for them as we go through this. So,
Great.
So yes, they have been invaluable to this process. To put all of this in context, we wanted to give you a very brief overview of where we came from, because there's obviously a lot of history that brought us to today. We'll get into some of the more recent things that were done, specifically some land use changes and some rezoning that happened just recently that you all approved. And then lastly, the third part that we'll talk about is what are your options moving forward to talk about adding some additional protection to our natural lands program here in Seminole County. So first, this goes all the way back to the original bond referendum that was held in 1990. The verbiage is directly from the ballot language here up on the screen, and that basically allowed the county to begin to accumulate $20 million, just over $20 million for the acquisition of natural lands throughout the county. This obviously was not a short process. There was a lot of work that went into this, including establishing an advisory committee, setting goals and objectives for the program, and you see it just based on that timeline alone after the bond referendum was approved of what it took to put all of that information together so that the county could begin to evaluate properties for potential acquisition and what the program would look like. So out of all that work that was done, both with residents and with the county, a mission statement was put together, and this is important because this is one of our guiding things, obviously, through the program, is that it's not just for the preservation and management of natural areas, but that we wanted to make those available for folks to be able to visit. And we'll show you where those places are located and the work that's been done since then. By 1994, we had a Natural Lands Advisory Committee that was assembled that put together recommending standards and criteria on how we would rank the properties for acquisition. And a set of criteria was developed that specifically looked at how are we going to rank these, and we took some liberties from the Carl program at the time, as well as what the St. John's River Water Management District was working on. There we go. So the process itself focused in not just on the quality of the natural lands, but our ability to manage those properties over time, the potential uses that could be on those particular properties, as well as any other special considerations, including how would we distribute, that's an interesting way of distribution, distribute the dollars throughout the county, where we would focus on those, and we would look at things such as, does the property have an imminent threat of being developed, for example, and any other special considerations as we went through the program. The program focused on 4 main areas, or a number of main areas throughout the county. and I'll show you where those were in a second. And then by 1998, an ordinance was put together that governed the use of natural lands. And this was primarily talking about what are the types of uses could we have on the property going forward. And it was very much restricted to passive uses. So if we're going to be on the properties, here's the type of uses that we would see out on them. Something of note as we're looking at this going forward, this did not add any protections to prevent the sale or swap of the properties. By 2000, there was another referendum for an additional $5 million for land acquisition. This was passed by the voters as well, and this particular bond referendum was also silent on the issue. So the properties that we have today, we have 13 main properties throughout the county, 12 of which are open for public recreation. And if you're wondering why the 13th is not, it's wet. It's completely wet on the south bank of the Lake Jessup. But all of those properties are open today and available for recreation for the public. We've got just over 6,600 acres, all of which contain critical habitat and wildlife, and all went through the exacting process that was established up front that really determined that these were the highest and best use, if you will, of these properties to acquire. Now, we went through certain land use changes throughout the program. First and foremost, we went back and took a look at our comp plan, where this particular program is addressed. So it's addressed in these particular elements throughout the comprehensive plan, but they do not, beyond which, have any additional protection regarding the sale or the swap of the properties. They are very much about how we will continue to manage those properties and maintain them for public use both now and in the future, as well as dealing with such things as significant environmental lands and how we would protect wildlife habitat corridors. By the 2008 evaluation and appraisal report, or EAR, that was done with our comprehensive plan, a number of those lands were changed over to preserved managed lands, and the 2008 ordinance was adopted regarding their use. And then just recently, which is what you approved just earlier this year, when it became apparent that one of our projects, which was under scrutiny at the time, had an underlying zoning, which was still laid back all the way to when the property was acquired, had a zoning of PD, we started looking at all of our properties, coming to find out that a majority of them had not been changed over when they originally were purchased back with the original bond program. This action was then taken. We went through the county's process for rezoning. All of them were part of the package, so all 13 properties, and those were approved earlier this year by you, moving those properties to public lands and institutions. Now, something to note here is that this does afford protection on these properties of certain types. So this will govern its current and future use moving forward. It does not, however, talk about either the sale or the swapping of land. So to sum up the review of all the information and all the work that's been done, starting with the 1990 bond referendum, we purchased those properties, and we purchased them for reasons, for both the preservation as well as passive recreation on those properties. We had ordinances that were developed and passed that regulated the use of those properties. We had the future land use map was changed to reflect that desire, as well as the zoning was changed to reflect that desire and put certain protections in place. The natural lands program as well is in complete agreement with the state requirements for our comp plan. So all of those things are in alignment, but we still had the question of how do you dispose, or what do you do to dispose of these properties if that's on the table? And what do those things tell us about our ability to dispose of these properties or to swap them out? So that brings us to the middle of last year, and that's when our residents that came forward, and again, thanking very much to David Baer for pulling that information together, bringing it to the board, and put that memo together that had three primary options for consideration. Our county attorney's office reviewed all three of those options, and that they are all viable, first and foremost. So options 1 and 2, and we'll talk about each one of these options in just a moment. Options 1 and 2, according to Chapter 125, is a viable alternatives, as well as option number 3, which deals more with the land trusts. And again, I'll describe all of these in greater detail. So the three options are creating a registry with option number 1 of protected conservation properties, Option number 2 is creating additional restrictions on the disposition of wilderness areas, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then lastly is to work with an accredited land trust as a third-party management. So option number 1, to create a registry, basically what that registry would say is that you would have criteria at which you would evaluate whether or not you could sell or swap the property, and then it would go to the voters to decide whether or not they thought this was a good idea to do, based upon the way this was written. So what we've done in working with the county attorney's office, looked at advantages and disadvantages of each one. Again, these are many tools that you have in your toolbox. It's just a question of which one fits best. So option number 1, some of the advantages that it has is it's pretty much consistent with the way we've developed the Natural Lands Program, with the disadvantage being that anytime you have a public vote on anything like this, it's going to be a long process. Option number 2 is basically requiring additional restrictions on making this decision. And in this case, the way that it was worded is that it would require a supermajority vote. So a supermajority vote by this board would either be a 4 vote or a 5 vote. So it either needs to be, in a supermajority, you've got to either have a 4-to-1 vote or a 5-to-0 vote in order for that to pass. So some of the advantages of it is obviously this is a much shorter process in order to put into place. Some of the disadvantages that came out from the attorney's office is that it's difficult to make this applicable to Florida counties, and I'll defer to them on their evaluation on that. But so there is some issues with applying that in this sense. However, it is possible to do so. Option number 3 is bringing in a land trust and working with the land trust. So at this point, you'd be working with a third party. So again, almost your advantages and disadvantages, both in the same, is now you've got a third party at the table in this discussion. And we would need to go through an entire process on how you bring a third party to the table, how they would manage those lands, how that would work, and put together basically a regulatory package on how that would function. Obviously, this is possible. It's done by other communities throughout the state of Florida and throughout the country. We have a natural lands program already in place, so there'd be a lot of overlap in certain things that would need to be sorted out. However, it is certainly an option to discuss. It's on the table. Other disadvantages that we've got, like I said, is that you're going to add additional administrative requirements that all need to be generated to make this a viable option. Again, it is definitely possible. Now, how you would move forward with all 3 of these, the way that they've been put together is that it would require a charter amendment on all 3 counts, which basically means based upon moving forward with any kind of referendum, that's something that needs to be done during a general election, which means we would basically work with the county attorney's office on putting together a referendum by November 2022. And there's a number of milestones that would have to be met throughout that process. Additionally, with option number 3, then we also need to get in touch with an accredited land trust and put that process together. So there's some more work that would need to be done there. Now, in going through all this information, and again, all of these are possible tools for you to consider, is we came up with option number 4, which is more of a wrinkle on option 2, so we call it option 2A. And that's something that this board could decide to do and could just basically move forward with this idea as well. And that you could put together an ordinance and enact an ordinance, and you wouldn't need to wait until November 2022, that does require a supermajority vote by this board in order to make that move, if you will. You could also add another piece to this that says in order to change that ordinance, you would also need a supermajority vote. So it adds an additional layer or additional restriction that makes it a little bit more difficult, or at least brings the criteria up another notch for the consideration of swapping out a property or selling a property. So again, it wouldn't necessarily need to follow a referendum process, but it would require a supermajority vote of this board, as well as a supermajority vote to invalidate the ordinance. So with that, you have 3 primary ways to go, with a 4th slight wrinkle on option number 2. And with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Chairman?
Questions? Yes, Commissioner.
I want to thank staff and our attorney's office and those citizens. I had requested this come forward some time ago, and I appreciate it very much. And I think all of us up here are interested in seeing this taken care of once and for all, for the longevity of this county and enjoyment of the citizens. I have a question on, it's, I guess, probably for our attorney. I particularly like option one, because I think it puts it in the hands of the voters. But I also find interest in option 2A that was just reviewed. Is there an interim? By example, we could move forward with a 2A until we get it on a ballot initiative in 2022, if that's what the
Sure.
board desires?
Absolutely.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Delory.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, staff, as well as county attorney, but most importantly, thank the residents. Question I have about the land trust, would that bring additional money into the area to manage these properties?
That's a great question, and that's something we would need to evaluate further, because you're correct. One of the questions that we would need to sort out is basically both the governance and the management of those properties. Some land trusts will manage the properties, obviously at a dollar amount that needs to be put in some kind of an account, if you will, for that to happen. Currently, we do have a natural lands program who does manage those, so that'd be something that we would need to sort out going
The reason I'm
forward.
asking is there are some land trusts that actually do matching dollars.
Correct.
And that's why I'm asking if you
Correct.
did any research in that.
Yeah, we've got research on it. It's just a question of how we proceed forward and how we would design that program to work best with the county.
Okay.
Further questions before we get into discussion? Because this was so interesting, or there were so many citizens that were interested in this, I don't have any cards, but is there any citizens here that would like to speak on this? Yes, Ms. Milch, but you need to fill out a form.
I'm actually here for the tree survey that I was.
Okay. Because I do want to hear from I think we all want to hear from the citizens before we go into debate on this, or discussion. And I was right, there were people here.
All right, Gabrielle Milch, 252 Coble Drive, Longwood, Florida. And the Natural Lands Program that Seminole County has has been a wonderful value to the citizens. The third-party approach is a good idea in many respects. It takes the government and the politicalness somewhat out of it, and it can set it up to be a success on many levels. As long as the land could not be sold, and there was some way to generate some type of revenue to make it self-sufficient for itself, if you were going to, add it as a business, so the Natural Lands Program in Seminole County, get turned off, would become some kind of a business. And sometimes natural lands are going to require more costs than what we may be willing to pay. And with climate change coming, variability, whatever you want to call it, some of those lands may be wet more than they are, and so public access may be limited in some respects. I think it's nice to have a third-party aspect of it, but I would like to see the protections there to keep the land maintained, have a long-term plan, and also have a secure funding source, as much as a secure funding source could be created in this world. And whether that's a user fee for people using it, I don't think that's been a consideration over the years for natural lands programs. I mean, when people pay to go to Disney World, they can pay to go see the trees. Reminds me of that song, We Paved Paradise and Put Up a Parking Lot, with a big hotel and a boutique and a hot spot. And I just hope that our natural lands mean more to people than that. And I understand they're developable lands and they have a high value, and you can put, 8 houses per acre on those natural lands and reduce those communities of vegetation and wildlife homes. And I just hope that we as human beings are not that short-sighted, although, profit over people and the economy sometimes wins mostly, so especially in this day and age, and that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Milch. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Again, I don't have any of yellow cards, so I see Ms. Harmon is walking up. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I didn't even think about filling this out for this one. I didn't even think I was going to speak. But Nancy Harmon, 752 Pioneer Way, Geneva, Florida. Good morning. I am very interested in what Commissioner Zimbauer is speaking of, his recommendation. I think if I were to go back and speak with the group of that I'm related with, sustainability and Sabre Seminole, Geneva Citizens Association, blah, 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 blah. We would love to have the vote by the citizens, but I do recognize that would take time to get on a referendum and get it on agenda. But item 2A is very appealing to me as well, because in the end, it is up to the commissioners and the citizens. And at some point, we can, as citizens, make that vote. But as we've seen with legal maneuvers, things can happen. So if we could even include that the citizens vote, but there's also the avenue that we would have the supermajority. And then my thought is that some of that would happen until specific parcels could be put under the third-party agreements where commissioners saw fit that it made sense to put a third-party agreement in where resources could be made to pay for its maintenance and the whatever requirements are for that properties. So, taking that big look, we don't have to put it all under conservation groups. I really believe in those people. But then again, there's places that are parks and recreations are very capable of being able to maintain. So I think if we look at that broader picture of the various options, but definitely the vote, and definitely we would really, as a community, we're talking supermajority in a lot of things, because we just feel that we can't do the 3-2 anymore. It just doesn't work for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Harmon.
Good morning, all. Joe Humphreys, 883 Cardinal Point Cove, Sanford, Florida. I want to commend Richard on an excellent presentation. I've had the good fortune of being able to work with him to some degree, long distance recently, obviously because of my appointment, thanks to Commissioner Zimbauer, to the Parks and Preservations Committee. I, kind of like Nancy, I think Mr. Zimbauer's idea, is a very valid one. Commissioner Delaury's suggestion of a third-party trust, there are some good organizations, Conservation Florida, for example, one that I'm involved with. Whether or not they'll bring money or want money obviously becomes the big conversation. I don't think at this point that we really know. So that's something that would have to be researched. I think, again, Commissioner Zimbauer's suggestion is certainly a good way to go, certainly in the interim at a minimum. But I think it's definitely something that needs to be done. I've heard the members of this board on many occasions over the last couple of years talking about lines in the sand. It's time that we draw lines in the sand. We also need to consider the fact that given what we've seen from the impacts, the exponential explosion of usage of our parks, our trails, that we need to seriously look at if we're going to continue to develop the county, then we need to provide parks and spaces for those people to be able to recreate. If there's any one thing, I'm reading a lot of the documents from the Board of Realtors, development companies, people are moving to areas that have good access to what? Outdoor spaces. So we need to protect what we have now, and we need to look into trying to expand that. And the board, or the organization does a great job. Just as an example, the Markham Trailhead is prolific with gopher tortoises. They're not on the FWC radar screen. But when I talked to Mr. Doobie about that, within a matter of days, less than a week, I think, when I drove by, all of the the tortoise burrows that are on property that we're responsible for were marked. Within several days after that, there's a gopher tortoise sign making people aware of the fact that they're there. So yes, our staff, short as they are extremely responsive. So again, I commend Richard and everybody, Jim Doobie and everybody in the department. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone else?
Hey there, Katrina Shaddix, 1133 Covington Street, Oviedo, Florida, 32765. I support what Joe, Nancy, and Gabby just said. I also support the 2A and a third-party buyout of the lands. And I would highly suggest, and we've had her speak before to the county, Tracy Dean of Conservation Florida, and the payoff when landowners donate their land to Conservation Florida to be saved forever, they get a huge tax break. And you're talking about if that third party is going to come in and generate money. We're not generating money now off the parks. So we can either get smart about it and start generating money, and I would suggest, like I did before, a trolley system where out-of-county residents pay to visit our natural lands, or have Conservation Florida do that. But there are ways to make money. I do support third-party management of the lands just to prevent anything like what almost happened last year when a land swap was approved 5-0 by this commission. We stopped it. We don't want that to happen again, and we need some solid ironclad protections, and I think the third-party management is the way to do that. And thank you to the staff and everyone for doing this presentation. It was very good, and to Dave Bear. Thank you.
Yes, but let me just clarify, Ms. Shaddix. This board and the previous board never approved the swap. We approved discussions of what the developer would do if we swapped the land. We had never approved the swap. And in fact, as soon as we saw what he would do, we voted 5-0 against it. So let's just be careful about how we say things, okay? All right. Okay.
Just another
Go, Rick.
point on that, we were obligated and ethically bound to consider
Right.
that issue
February.
by the court.
That's right.
So let's just be very clear about that. This board never approved a swap. But I understand the concern that all the citizens had, as we all did, about the potential of protecting our conservation lands, and that's why we're here today. That's why we're all interested in this. So let's talk about that. We have now, I think, was that what you wanted to address? Is that what you, okay. So now let's get back to the discussion to see if we can come up with some sort of consensus. Commissioner Zimbauer.
One of the citizens brought up, I think it was Nancy Harmon, maybe this is a better question for our parks folks. I had never thought about it before until Ms. Harmon raised it. With the multiple lands that we currently have, are there some that, because of their mere nature, maybe they're excessively wet, maybe there's not a lot of access for public, do we have any that would better be served in a third-party conservatory trust versus one of the other options? And the reason I ask that is maybe there's a hybrid somewhere here, that maybe there is some lands that we can't build trails in and we can't have people access, but we want to put them into conservation. Are there a handful of those that if we did some hybrid, that some are better in that format versus another option?
So I put up on the screen, I had this in my back pocket, so to speak. You mentioned about other lands that are here in the county, and all the other landowners that are here that have almost 44,000 total acres in the county preserved or protected under various agencies. So number one is, yes, that is something we could certainly do additional work into to see which ones were available. On the county side, we do have other properties that do not fall under the Natural Lands Program, for example, which we have had donated to the county, which are definitely for preservation. We have lands that are within the, literally within the river, which are not buildable properties, which were donated to the county as conservation lands. They are not part of the Natural Lands Program because there is no access to them. But certainly, we could look at some hybrid that then takes those properties as well and accumulates them into a third way of looking at things, if you will.
Right, and one of the main reasons that I asked that question outside of the Natural Lands Program is GIS, on my request 2 years ago when I arrived here, started putting together every parcel of property this county owns. And that's been quite an undertaking. Our county attorney's office has had to do a lot of research and review, and I appreciate that very much for you folks doing that. As well as, I then learned that it's controlled by 3 or 4 different divisions in the county and not just one department oversees it, which was another hurdle to overcome. And so those properties, as you mentioned, which are not part of technically today's discussion, I would be very interested in looking at those because there are some that are in the river or in the lakes, or we just recently had one this board reviewed up on Lake Sylvan where there was some encroachment from private citizens into the conservation areas, which have now been abandoned, thank goodness. But there's areas like that that may be better suited in a land trust or conservation control. I don't know. I think that's something I'd like to understand more about.
And, let me suggest, or let me bring forth just a kind of a hybrid of a hybrid of a hybrid here, if we will. I think in hearing all of you speak in the past, I think all of us agree that some type of 2A would be something that we could, and I really respect, Mr., your hard work and that of some citizens that have brought this forward also, but I think 2A, in the sense that we could do that now, I think makes a lot of sense. I also believe that there are, as the other commissioners have mentioned, property that might be well-served to be in conservation with a accredited conservation organization. I don't know, though, and this is just a thought, if we, I believe that overwhelmingly this charter would pass.
I agree.
And so I don't know what's served necessarily. We are going to talk about charter, putting things on charter at a later work session, and maybe we can discuss it then, but I don't know what would be served anymore other than a validation of 2A if we put it on the ballot later. I think that the citizens do want further protections of our natural lands, those that they purchased, and so therefore I don't know if we need to put any in this on the ballot. I think we can discuss it later, but I think right now the step that I would take or think is most preferred by this commissioner is that we do put together an ordinance for a supermajority. As been put in by Mr. Durr, suggested by Mr. Durr, and then also direct staff, and that includes, of course, the attorney's office, to look at the possibility of which one of these properties, both that have been donated to us, as well as those that are purchased by the citizens in conservation, would be better served in conservation. I think Ms. Shaddix mentioned one that I've worked with in the past with Ms. Dean and others, but there's a number of them, and they have different forms that they work on. Some, I think all of them, all the groups that we're talking about, don't expect or want somebody to put in the money to to maintain it. So I don't think we would be saving any money there, but I think it would be another layer of protection, especially when they are things that would not be able, as Commissioner Delory indicated, and others, that we could put trails and other stuff through. So that's just a thought. Commissioner Delory, Commissioner Herr, and then Commissioner Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the first step would always be to, make a vote to do something. And I don't think the vote should be a supermajority. I think it needs to be unanimous. I think it needs to be a unanimous vote. And I want to make sure that that's legally possible. Is that correct, Mr. Applegate?
Yes. You have great discretion in this area, so yes, the answer is you can have a 5-0. The question is that practical?
I think if we're going to do something to this, that we should require a 5-0 vote if you're going to change something. And I think that would be a good...
Like an ILA?
Excuse me? What?
Nothing.
I didn't hear you.
I said like an ILA.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad.
Okay, come on, guys.
Jumping ahead after afternoon session.
We'll talk about that later this afternoon.
Just saying.
Okay, just saying. I think that'd be the first immediate stopgap help that we could possibly do. And then I think the next thing is to, as we're hearing, put something on the charter from the citizens' approval or not approval. But more importantly, I think that there needs to be a little more information about which piece of property we should be putting into some type of trust, what trust makes sense, which piece of property makes sense, and should we start our own trust? That's even another aspect of it. I think all those things, but I think the first step is that we should make sure that whatever we do has to be unanimous from this board's perspective to put the level of trust out there. That's my input.
Commissioner Herr, and I've got Commissioner Herr, Commissioner Lockhart, then our attorney, and then Commissioner Zimbauer again. Okay.
I am not clear on the difference between Commissioner Constantine's hybrid of a hybrid and your hybrid, so let me be clear on that, because it sounded to me like what you said does lead us right back to the hybrid that's been proposed, so I may need more clarification on that.
If you want me to give it real quick, just the conservation part of it, the conservation, that was not part of 2A. That was what I was, where
think
they
it
would
is.
go back and look at the
So I need
conservation.
clarification on that, because I think 2A does say that, right?
No. But go ahead, please. We can clear all this out.
Chairman, are you talking about rolling 3
Well,
into this as well?
2A didn't say that, but your proposal did say that we
Yes,
would
but-
do 2A and then at the same time
What I-
consider preservation.
Correct,
perpetual, right.
correct. Commissioner Herr, you're correct. My initial was 2A as the initial stopgap.
Correct.
Then move to the voters for option 1, but some lands that may not even be part of today's discussion that the county owns would be better served by a conservation trust outside of our control.
And that's agreed, I agree.
Okay, so they're the same. Okay, so.
Similar. Yeah.
So my comment, I don't necessarily align around a unanimous vote, particularly given the lack of case law and the ability to challenge. So I think a supermajority that's not unanimous may withstand the test of time a little better. I would also say that whatever we do, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that the community understands what it does and what it doesn't do. Because even these perpetual land trusts allow for change. And the fact that they call them perpetual drives me crazy, because it puts people like us in a horrible position. So I have a predisposition to not use any land trust that calls itself perpetual. Let me just say that. So we have a communication requirement that is wildly significant in this, including if we go to the voters and even if we don't go to the voters. So I think there's a bigger overarching back of this process that is as important as the front end of this process.
Commissioners, Mr. Applegate is chomping at the bit over here. Can I let him speak before the, okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Applegate.
First, let me congratulate and thank Rick and his team. It's been great working with them, and I'm sure that I would recommend, as you continue your discussion here this morning, that I've been thinking about, we would draft, just a rough draft of an ordinance for you all to look at a work session, so that we can get a clear understanding based on that document what staff and the legal department needs to come up with as a final document. But again, you have great discretion in this area. This is actually very exciting for us to work on. And I just want to quickly say before I forget, I want to thank David Baer and Nancy Harmon and others for working with Paul and Robbie during the last year or so with Rick. It's been great working with them, and they've been a tremendous help to us. So that's my suggestion. We'll come back, whatever you all decide as an approach, we'll come back with a very rough draft with Rick's office, and you can get into more detail there.
Okay. Commissioner Lockhart, then Commissioner Delory.
So I don't really know that it needs to be repeated, except to say that I agree with the most recent hybrid of a hybrid of a hybrid.
Super hybrid?
I love the idea of starting with 2A because it gets things moving very quickly. I like the idea of following it up with the referendum and the charter amendment, but having the discussion at a later date. Just conceptually, the voters voted to assign these funds, so it makes sense to me that they would also be consulted and have a voice in what might happen with what was purchased with the funds, recognizing that referendums are costly and sometimes contentious, but I still think that might be the best way to go. I would like to learn more about the land trust option and how that might impact some of our properties beneficially. It makes me nervous for the perpetuity piece, to what that might message unintentionally, and I think that covers the waterfront. I think we've almost all said the same thing. Okay.
Commissioner Delory.
I didn't ask to speak.
Okay.
But I
Commissioner
can if you want me
Zimbauer.
to.
Thank you. The conservation side, if we're going to have staff look into that, I think we have to be careful. I actually have some experience with that with some family land, and you've got to be very careful because some of those agencies or entities have the right to exchange land, sell land, improve land, and do all these things, and I don't think that's what the desire of this board is, to put it into some entity who then would do absolutely what we didn't want to happen. So that's going to take a little bit of a deeper dive to understand that. So that's one issue. For council, it sounds like everybody is saying the same thing. In order for this to get to the voters, how soon do you need to start working on ballot language and all those things? Do you need that direction today or by a deadline of when?
Well, we have time. The ordinance that would require it to be on the ballot would have to be adopted no later than 90 days before the general election. Now, when I say 90, in my mind, that's usually about 110, 120, so that we have extra time in case an issue comes up. So I would say no later than the last meeting in July of 2022, we should be ready to go with putting it on the ballot, which, again, we have plenty of time between now and then to do that. But the sooner we can start working on it, the better, obviously.
If I could just,
Yes.
if I could follow up on that, I would suggest, though, that we not wait until that short a lead time, because there will be a need to educate the public as to what the ballot measure would be about. So So we can try to build a schedule for you, but I would suggest that you give yourself enough time that we can have sufficient opportunity to educate the public and let them know what the intent of the ballot initiative, of the referendum is about.
And that's-
And what, and,
well,
I got a
mean, that's
second
what I
part,
mean.
the second part along that same line. And of course, this would have to, our board would have to discuss it and have an understanding. But I do like the idea, if we're going to go to the referendum, and that's what this board desires to do, does it make sense, and should it be part and parcel or a separate referendum item that we ask the citizens at the same time, do they desire to have a $250,000 levied for additional land purchases, as we had historically in this county?
You could. We want to be careful that there isn't confusion, so that if someone is challenging, I've been through those wars in Orange County many, many times, where more than one ballot proposition's on at the same time. But to answer your question directly, it should not be a problem, so,
it certainly would be separate.
yes, absolutely.
Again, I think all these are great questions and discussion. I do, again, remind commissioners that we have scheduled, I don't know, we wanted to give time for the staff and the attorney to work it out, but we have scheduled a discussion of potential charter amendments, which will be well in advance of the 120 days. So this would be one that we would certainly, and I've always thought that this would be one that we would certainly discuss at that meeting. So what I'm hearing, if I can just, because we've all said we're saying the same thing, but let's make sure we are, that we ask the staff to put together an ordinance requiring, and I know Commissioner Delory has said a majority, unanimous, but I think the rest of us are looking at a supermajority ordinance, both to do anything with those properties as well as amend it, which is part of 2A, that we later will, in the workshop session of charters, discuss whether or not we want to put it on the charter, and also directing staff to look at the possibility, with all the implications that have been discussed here and with you and with the attorney, about whether or not we want to consider putting some of the property in conservation, with the conservation groups. Is that everything? Does that kind of say, yes, Commissioner Herr?
I
missed
heard
something?
one additional statement, and I cannot recall which of you said
Okay.
it, but it was the notion of our own trust, which I don't
Or
think
that's
is-
part of looking at it, whether it's our own trust
as long as
or
we-
another trust, but looking at those possibilities. Right now, we have a lot of questions, we don't have a lot of answers. Is that something that someone could make a motion on?
Well, before we go there, I want to make sure, because words do matter.
Yes.
And I just want a clarification of your overview and summary. I think it's consensus of what I'm hearing is we do want to move forward to put this to the voters as a charter amendment. Not consider moving it forward, but we do want to do that. I think that's what I've heard from everyone.
Well, Commissioner Zimbauer, if I could just say, I said that I don't know what it would accomplish. I certainly think there would be validation there. But what I was trying to get at is there are potentially other, as we said, charter amendments that might be considered. And I'm just saying we don't have to make that determination right now. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't be supportive of putting it on the charter, but I don't know if we want to make that decision right now, and I think it would be better off to be considered with potentially others that we might put on at a work session. That's why I was putting it
My
that way.
my only concern there, Mr. Chairman, is, I think we just heard staff that they believe they should get working towards that now.
But they're working on that charter workshop right now, so that will be coming back soon, correct?
I don't know exactly when it's scheduled, but it's imminent.
Yes, okay? So it is coming up rather soon. Commissioner Hearn?
I would just tell you that depending on what else is on the ballot, we need to be contemplative of when we place this. So the
Correct.
question for me isn't if we place it, but it's when we place it. So giving direction to get ready to place it for this one may not be the best decision today. I think we need to be flexible in order to make sure that we're representing to the public as effectively as we can.
But it would certainly be one of the issues that we will discuss at
Understood.
that work session discussion of charter.
I'm
Commissioner Lyon?
agreeing with you.
Yes, I know you are. That's what I'm saying. I just want to make sure that the staff knows that it's going to be on the agenda. Yes.
Yeah, so for clarification, because I agree words do matter, and so my intent and my thought process right now is that it would be a part of that charter discussion, and I would likely support it when we have the discussion. But we're in a work session right now, and so while we're giving you direction, I don't know that we necessarily want to take a vote to say what we are going to do before we talk about what we're going to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I will make a motion that we ask staff to move forward with option 2A.
Are we making motions?
We can make motions on the
You can
thing.
make, under your new procedures, you can.
Yeah, we can make motions, but, and that was a motion, but we don't
Okay.
have to, but I
I'll hear
agree
the
with you.
motion.
Yeah,
I'll hear the
okay.
motion.
The
Yeah.
motion was just 2A? You don't want to add all the other?
2A, and then move forward at a later time with the discussion of the charter amendment for the charter review.
And allow the staff to look into the other possibilities of trusts?
Correct.
Okay.
Second.
Motion and seconded. Any discussion?
What's the definition of a supermajority?
4.
I'm clarifying.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
It's 75%, is that what it is? And 75%
Well,
is best
I understand
is
the math,
4.
but we
Yeah.
talked about it two ways today.
Right.
4. All right. Everybody understand? Did you want to say
No,
something?
I'm good.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations. Good job.
Mr. Chairman, can we take a 5-minute recess, please?
Sure. Everybody okay with that? Sure. 5-minute break?
Absolutely.
Every hour or so to stretch your legs, not bad.
Congratulations, everybody that's out there that was supportive of this. We're going to go into the second part of this work session. Before that, I think that we have Commissioner Delory is asked to say a few words, Commissioner.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just notified this past weekend that the Oviedo American Legion Post, which various members talked about, I see Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde's a member of, was named the #1 post in the state of Florida. So I want to congratulate them.
Congratulations.
And Mr. Chairman, that's all based on their volunteerism and their outreach and the things that they do, not just for the community, but for the veterans. So well done.
Well deserved.
Right.
Bill, congratulations.
Good work.
All right, we are now up on work session part number 2. Review a proposal with Land Development Code revisions relating to, first, arbor regulations.
Sure. Good morning. For the record, Rebecca Hammock, Development Services Director. I just wanted to do a brief introduction before turning it over to Kane & Associates, since we are going to have multiple presenters this morning on the various items. First, we're going to have Eliza Harris-Giuliano and Greg Witherspoon from Kane & Associates present an update on the arbor section of the code, as well as the residential neighborhood pattern concept that we discussed at the last meeting, and then also introduce a new topic for missing middle housing. And then myself and Mary are going to discuss the net buildable density issue or definition, and then Jeff Hopper is going to discuss some other proposed changes that staff is proposing internally. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Eliza.
Thank you very much. Eliza?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me.
And Eliza, you're going to talk about each one one after another, the first, the arbor ordinance?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We'll let you go through, and then we'll stop after that one for discussion, okay?
Okay. I'll just clarify really quickly. So there are 3 topics. Greg is going to talk to the first topic, and I will talk to the second 2 topics.
Okay.
So just to recap quickly, we're in the 3rd phase of a 4-phase project. We're in the meat of it, which is actually starting to draft specific standards and language. The topics today are arbor regulations, which is an update on something we've discussed previously, residential neighborhood pattern, also an update, and missing middle standards. We've discussed that at a very high level conceptually previously, but we haven't actually talked standards up until now. So I'm going to hand it over to Greg to talk about arbor, and he's the lead landscape architect within our firm in Kane & Associates.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Greg Witherspoon, for the record. I live at 2763 Lionheart Road in Orange County, close to Seminole County. Pleasure to be here. So we've been working, as Eliza mentioned, on final language for redrafting the arbor regulations, and I apologize I wasn't able to make the last workshop, but I'm here to give you an update on where we're at. We have increased the amount of trees that have been protected based on recommendations from staff and from commissioners, which is basically lowering the threshold of 8 inches down to 6 inches. We have added longleaf pines to the specimen tree list, and we are also referring the tree list to an existing plant list within another location of the existing code. So there's already a plant list, and we don't want to have duplicate trees and plant list all over the place. As we continue to coordinate additional items, one of the big things that came up is that we had some duplicate definitions, and so we're working through finalizing, wordsmithing those definitions, and then all those definitions are going to be in the Article 2 or Chapter 2, where the rest of the definitions for the code are located. And then we're also finalizing language on prohibiting removal of more than 75% of the protected trees. Now, that language is actually not in the arbor ordinance. It's located in 2 other places within the code. It's in the site planning and then in the subdivision regulations as well.
A little bigger. Keep going.
There we go.
You guys couldn't see that?
So this piece, I believe, is the subdivision regulations, and it doesn't show the change. The big change is that the regulations currently say severely restricted, and we're going to strike that. We're proposing to strike that.
Flip
and
that
we would-
over.
and we would say that it would be, yeah, there we go. Yeah, now you can clearly see this one. So it says, unless the planning manager finds the development of the site would be severely restricted, and we would propose to remove that and say inordinately burdened as defined by Florida statutes, because that definition is actually included in Florida statutes. And so that gives a little bit more clarity and a little bit more clarity as to how that decision can be made. And then, of course, there's the opportunity to request a waiver as well. And with that, those are the big items that we're continuing to work on in terms of the arbor regulations. That's just a quick update.
Okay, anything further on Arbor before we go on to the next one? So if there isn't, let's stop here. Ms. Hammack? Because I have people that do want to talk about the Arbor. So, Ms. Hammack, why don't you give us the practical application of what this would, the new ordinance potential would do, based after discussions with you yesterday that I had?
So, good morning again, Rebecca Hammack, Development Services Director. I just wanted to clarify what Greg had spoken about. So currently in the site plan regulations, there is a section that speaks to use of natural resources. And so for site plans, which are for development of non-residential uses, it does require that you preserve the 75, you can remove 75% of the protected trees on site and preserve 25%. However, there is language in there that says unless, it would severely restrict the use of the site. So we're proposing to amend that so that it would, to be in line with the Florida statutes definition, to be inordinately burdened. Because right now it's a little difficult for staff to make that determination as, severely burdened, and there's no criteria to make that determination. So the Florida statutes provides a little bit more guidance on that. And so we also are proposing to add language to the subdivision regulations. There is no current language within the subdivision regulations, and these are when final engineering plans come in to actually develop for residential subdivisions. So we're adding the same language to the subdivision regulations as the site plan regulations. So you'd be required to preserve a minimum of 25% of the protected trees, which is the 6-inch or greater. And so there is still waiver language provided in there. They would have to come to the board to receive a waiver. However, the planning manager still has the ability to make concessions if they can demonstrate that the development of the site would be inordinately burdened in accordance with Florida statutes. So we're hoping that may help to assist in the concerns related to clear cutting.
Okay, are there questions?
Ms. Chapman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, can you get us a copy of the Florida State statute that talks about the qualifications of burdening?
Yeah, yes, we can provide that to you and so that you can see it.
Because I don't have that.
Okay, yep.
There's a difference between the protected trees and the legacy trees. So 75% of the protected trees can be clear cut unless it's inordinately burdening, and then they can do more. What about the specimen trees or the legacy trees, whatever we're calling those that we are protecting? What happens to those?
So those are also protected trees. So they're qualified in terms of being removed, just like any other protected tree. There's 3 different categories that we have currently. We've got champion trees, which are state level biggest tree around. There's historic trees, which is kind of a unique category, which the commission and the citizens actually get to give a little bit more credence to a tree that means something in multiple ways. And then there's specimen trees, which are 24 24 inches or greater. The specimen trees can be removed, just like the rest of the protected trees. However, the penalty for removing those trees is greater. So the idea is that we're giving a little bit more, I don't want to say penalty, but it's harder to remove a specimen tree because of the mitigation factor that's required.
Okay, if I have some latitude here, I'm trying to get my head around this, you know.
I am too.
Yeah, one of the things that I was concerned about in our last discussion is just, and I think I'm getting it from citizens constantly, it's like every single project that came in, people were saying, hey, yesterday we had all these beautiful trees, and today there's nothing. It seems to me like, or from what you're saying is, everything's on the chopping block here. And you know, there's really no protection of those trees. And to me, 75% of these trees can just be cut down no matter what. It's 100% of the trees that aren't 6 inches and 75% of the trees that are 6 inches without any consideration can be dropped. Then if you've got the word inordinately burdened, then all the other trees can be cut down. I don't see any real protections here. Commissioner Zimbauer, I'm not getting it.
Thank you for going into that. I'm not sure we've got the answer yet.
Yeah.
But, the last discussion, you know, we had a lot of discussion about, in my opinion, we need an arborist on our staff to make certain decisions. There may be trees that are of much larger circumference that have less value than a tree that has a lower circumference. And we haven't talked about, if we're going to take out 75% of the trees, what's going to be replanted? What are the requirements for those trees that have been removed to be replanted? I think we want to hear that and understand what that means for those trees that are taken out.
Certainly. So the requirement is inch per inch. So every protected tree that is removed, the requirement is the development has to come back and provide inch for inch the same amount of caliper tree. If they were removing trees that are 24 inches or greater, it's double that amount. So a 24-inch tree would require 48-inch new caliper trees. In the case that they can't provide that, we do provide that they can purchase and pay a fee in lieu of providing those additional trees. That is also a disincentive to get rid of trees. We're going to be proposing a fee, we haven't worked out the exact number yet, that is a dollar amount inch per inch, and it can get very expensive, very expensive.
So would that be like a tree bank?
Yes.
So if by example, I think we did this on the solar project over in International Parkway, where they wanted to put solar panels in and take out several oaks, and we requested and they paid for, I don't know, a dozen or 2 dozen oaks to be replanted somewhere else.
It was a negotiation, yeah.
So this is an idea that would be banked, that we could use that to plant, for instance, on our property or somewhere else in the county along the trails or some of the greenways that go through the urban areas.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, one of the early sections of the ordinance, we're proposing that there's an individual other than the commission that is in charge of producing a budget and allocating how those funds would be spent and presenting them to you for approval.
And is the cost, you say the penalty, if you will, to not replant, is that cost significant enough that they'd be better off planting a tree if they could?
Every site is different, and it will depend on the calculation of, you know, it's very different, and that's why it's important that each site has to do these individual calculations, right? So it's not as simple as saying, you know, for, you know, $100 you get to replace a tree. It's just, it's an individual calculation, and it depends on what trees are on site, how much the development itself needs to make it a financially feasible development. It's a balancing act, but that penalty does come into play.
All right. Well, it's been my experience, for the most part, we see areas where they go in and they kill and knock down every tree, and then come back in and put their sidewalks and build their infrastructure. But for the most part, most developers if there are large shade trees, unless they're where a road needs to go, they typically like to keep them because
valuable.
it's an attribute to their
Absolutely.
community.
Absolutely.
So I think, we just have to have a clear understanding where all this is headed, where the replacements and what the costs are and so forth.
Commissioner Lockhart?
So this is complicated and great all at the same time. I'm glad that we're having the discussion, but there definitely are multiple layers that we're trying to weed through here.
Yes.
The difference between the development of a new neighborhood versus an existing single-family home, and I know we have an exemption for parcels under 2 acres unless the tree is a specimen tree greater than 24 inches in diameter, is that right?
So it is complicated, and there's multiple levels, but currently, the state statute prohibits us from regulating those trees on single-family residences. The way your current ordinance works is that it's a 5 acres, or less than 5 acres, we're not doing anything, but greater than 5 acres, we can. However, it's a single-family residence, because of the state statute, we still don't have any control over that. What you're referring to is that we put in the idea of a specimen tree that should these statutes change, we'd be able to regulate a specimen tree even on single-family residential property.
Okay, so I should have put my little sticky flag down to find the right spot, because I just read it, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding it the way that you just described it. Didn't I read 2 acres? Where did I read that?
I don't recall
Where-
2 acres
Yeah,
specifically.
it's
Was
2
it
acres.
Okay.
Give me a page number, please, so I don't flip back and forth again.
And I'm not sure if it's in the current version. It was, with the last version that was provided at the last work session, the 2 acres was a proposed change. However, since the Florida statutes, or Florida law doesn't allow very much regulation of trees on residential property, we just had them take it
71.
out and keep it consistent with how it reads now with the 5 acres.
Okay, so it's on page 71 in this book, so I don't know what version it is, but it says, it's letter G. This is the state laws. Any property designated by state law that mandates additional or alternative tree or arbor requirements and procedures. If said laws are repealed, single-family residential lots under 2 acres are exempt from these provisions. However, specimen trees and historic trees identified on lots under 2 acres will remain subject to the provisions of this chapter. So to me, when I read that, I read that we're saying however is, if it's under 2 acres, that's not applying to the state law. I feel like the however is giving me pause, the way that it's included in there, and I want to make sure that we're all interpreting the however the same way.
And from my understanding, the way that the state law works is that single-family residential, they're not required to get an arbor permit or a permit to remove a tree. However, if someone does remove the tree and we become aware of it, we do have the ability to say, well, do you have something from an arborist or landscape architect that says that tree was, dead, dying, diseased? But currently, our code right now exempts occupied single-family residential or residential under 5 acres.
So I'm worried about what we're about to do. So are we going to say we're not going to require permits because state law prohibits it, but if we find out you took down a tree, we're going to come back later on and ask you about it?
Well, the state law allows you to do that. Well, right now, we don't regulate single-family residential under 5
got that.
acres.
Got it.
So let's just say, under current code right now, somebody had a 7-acre or 10-acre parcel, and we had a code enforcement complaint that someone removed trees. Then we could say, well, can you provide documentation saying that you were permitted to remove those trees? Do you have something from an arborist or landscape architect that the trees were dead, dying, diseased? Any of the criteria within the Florida statutes.
I foresee issues there. Am I the only one that foresees potential issues there?
No.
Okay.
And that's just how the current law and current code are right now.
Okay, but what are we gonna do? I feel like that's where I'm, like, I understand.
I think that's what they're looking for us to tell them.
I know, but what are you all suggesting to get us out of that? If that's a conundrum, what's the suggestion to fix it?
And I don't know that it's necessarily a conundrum, but originally, the consultant had recommended changing it from 5 acres to 2 acres for the exemption. However, staff said, well, maybe we should just keep it how it is now, based on, how the Florida statutes reads. But ultimately, that's up to the board, because right now, we exempt all residential under 5 acres and under. But the consultant originally said, well, maybe we should do 2 acres and under, only exempt 2-acre properties and under. So it's really a policy decision of the board.
So I think what we're hearing is they want us from 5 to 2.
Well, no, what I'm hearing her say is the consultant recommended that.
No, understood.
I'm not hearing that staff is recommending that, so I'm curious to know what our staff is recommending. We're the policymakers, and you can punt to us all day long, and we'll own it, but I'd kind of like to know, walk me through the thought process of the benefits, the negatives, the positives of what could happen if we make that change. And I don't know that I need to do that right this minute, but I think it's important to understand.
Commissioner Hurd, did I see your hand up?
You did. I just wanted to ask for the record, because of the representation of clear cutting, and the notion that someone would try to keep trees, large trees if they could, that there's a secondary issue, and that is the grading of the land that becomes difficult, which could cause flooding to the surrounding lots if it's not graded appropriately. So it may not always be feasible. And so I just want to ask that question, get it on the record. Do I have an understanding of that?
That's correct.
Okay.
Grading significantly impacts the health and viability of trees depending on how it's handled, yes.
In addition to the flooding of surrounding properties?
Correct, yes.
You can have your cake, but you can't eat it too.
Well, we address both issues, and we're looking at this very narrowly with the notion that solving one problem and creating another doesn't actually help in all instances. So we just have to be careful.
Commissioner Delory, then Commissioner Lockhart, then Commissioner Zimmer.
Well, I'd like to go back to what Commissioner Lockhart was talking about. I'd like to have staff's input, not the consultant's input. That's what you're asking for.
So I think the current code is written such that at the time, I believe they were considered those the smaller acreage parcels in the county, and so more suburban or urban, and so their tree permitting requirements were put in place for those, and then the larger acreage parcels were more for agricultural purposes, and they were exempt, which for any kind of agricultural use, they're exempt anyway under Florida statutes. So if now we're becoming more suburban, even and more urban, do we want to mandate arbor permitting for the smaller lots? So I don't necessarily oppose. I think it kind of makes sense to go down to a smaller acreage. However, given the Florida statutes, the existing law, we kind of felt it was a moot point right now. So that's why we said maybe we just keep it as is in the current code. If the state law changes, then perhaps maybe we look at it. It's not to say the state law doesn't allow us to enforce requirements if they took down perfectly healthy trees, but really the only way we would probably know about it is if we got a complaint, because we can't require permitting for them.
Let's clarify what the state law says so that everybody understands that. What the state law says is, it was a law that was passed in 2019, that it says that we cannot require, homeowners are not required, there's no lot size limit, homeowners are not required to get a permit to remove a tree or prune a tree that an arborist has determined is dangerous. That's it. It's not a healthy tree. It just relates to dangerous trees that homeowners we cannot require them to get a permit to remove or significantly prune a tree that has been certified as dangerous. That's the extent of the state law. It doesn't say you can't you can't require permits to remove healthy trees or things like that. So let's just be clear on the limitations of what the state law says. It deals strictly with dangerous trees.
Yeah, that's very important. Yeah, go ahead.
So following up on that, are the single-family residences also subject to the tree replacement and arbor fund contributions?
Yes, the single-family residences that would regulate protected trees would also be subject to the rest of the ordinance, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to use me as an example
Sure.
because I like getting myself into trouble a lot. So, discussions in the Lockhart house. There's a really nice big oak tree in the backyard that is currently pushing up pavers and causing the pool to potentially leak, and things are shifting, and love the tree, birds love the tree, but we're having the debate. What happens? I mean, what's more important? Are we going to continue to repair the pool and keep calling out the paver guy to fix the pavers, or is the tree at some point going to have to go? We're still having that debate in our house. So it's probably a specimen tree. Some of these folks were in my backyard this last week. It's probably a specimen tree. I could not fit an additional 24 trees on my property. Couldn't fit them. I wouldn't know where to put them. I think that it wouldn't be fair to the new trees. It would be dumb. I mean, an arborist would not suggest cramming 24 new trees onto my 3rd-acre lot. So we need to make sure that we're not creating a situation that makes it impossible for homeowners to use their property the way that they want to use it. And so that's just, I'm throwing it out there because it's a real-world scenario, and I don't know.
Yep.
I guess I'm confused. But go ahead, Commissioner.
Why are you confused?
Well-
What's confusing?
Let me
Okay.
Go ahead.
And in addition to that, under the current way we do this and the proposed way we are thinking about doing it, your remedy to that is to cut it down and hope nobody reports it.
Right.
And so we, once again, I worry that we're pitting neighbor against neighbor.
Mother against daughter.
Mother against daughter. Husband against wife, which may be okay, I don't know. So we have to think through the front end of it as well as the back end of,
Right.
is it going to now be cost prohibitive for you to do that? And quite frankly, that'll just cause citizens to do what they need to do and move on.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the solution is, but that's certainly the conundrum.
But if I could ask a question, and maybe, I don't know who needs to clarify this. Under our existing code, though, your scenario, you wouldn't be required to get a permit, correct?
Correct, as long as
So
her
you could take the
residence is
tree
under
out,
5
and
acres.
regardless of dangerous, we don't talk about dangerous.
Yeah.
You just, and I don't know if you're 2 acres or not, but.
No.
So
Third.
under even the new scenario, you'd be,
But what I just heard was, if someone calls and complains, and so they come, I have to present a letter that says that the tree, no? That's not what I just heard?
Yeah, that's why I was.
Well, and Nicole, tell us where you are in the, what
That's the state.
section of the
so
agreement?
what I just talked to you, what I just mentioned about the dangerous trees is a state statute.
Okay, so tell us in our proposed code what section we're in.
So Rebecca,
'Cause I'm
can
not
you,
seeing it
I don't,
either.
because I'm not looking in the code, where is the exemption for residential properties in the code today?
Code proposed.
Exemptions are under 60.5.
That's where I am.
And so residential properties 5 acres or less are exempt. So in my example scenario, I was saying if, for instance, you had a 10-acre property.
I don't know that they have that, Rebecca, that you may
No,
not
we
have
don't
that.
Here we do.
It's in the
It says
attachment. So
60.5.
60.5, what letter?
My G, it says 2 acres.
Well, and currently, and that was the proposal by the consultant, to change it to 2 acres instead of the 5 acres.
But it's the specimen tree is different. That,
Yes, it's under 2 acres, including specimen trees. So right now, if you're 5 acres or less, and you're an occupied, single-family residential lot, you're exempt from our arbor ordinance, no matter what.
Where does
specimen
it say
trees.
that?
Even specimen
Where does
trees.
it say that?
In the existing ordinance, yes.
It's not in front of us. The
I
existing.
don't know that we have it in here.
Recommended.
Yeah, I think we, so I'll find it in the existing
Okay.
code and give you this section. And then the Florida statutes does say, let's see, it says, "A local government may not require a notice, application, approval, permit, fee, or mitigation for the pruning, trimming, or removal of a tree on residential property if the property owner obtains documentation from an arborist certified by the International Society of Agriculture or Florida licensed landscape architect that the tree presents a danger to persons or property."
Okay.
So in your case of the pool or your house, if, yeah.
But I'm the however. See, this is where my however, see, Commissioner Constantine is interpreting it that I'm exempt because I'm under 2 acres. But there's this next little sentence that says, however, specimen trees and historic trees identified on lots under 2 acres will remain subject to the provisions of this chapter. So,
Just remove that rest. That would have to be removed.
well, I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing.
Well, the question becomes is, do you want to keep the oak tree in your backyard or not?
Or does Tim?
Just tell us.
How do we work this?
So, right, and I think the last time we had the work session, there was discussion about protecting the specimen trees. And we certainly can keep the code as is, or change it to protect historic and specimen trees on residential property. Currently, they're not protected on residential property that are under 5 acres.
I understand totally what we're talking, what we have now. My concern is what we're about to do. And I'm only using myself as an example because we are not the only household in Seminole County that has specimen trees in old neighborhoods. There are lots of them. And so that's why I went to the remedy still for that single-family resident is to somehow find a way to squeeze 24 trees on a 3rd-acre lot.
Right.
Or pay to play.
A quick point of clarification, it's inch for inch, but that doesn't mean inch diameter trees. And in fact, we're requiring that the replacement trees be at least 3 inches. Minor clarification.
Right, but 24 of them.
Not down to 8.
Well, eight of them.
Seven.
It would be
Eight of
eight
them.
It would be 8 of them.
Got it. I still can't.
3
fit-
divided by 24, yeah.
Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner
Math.
Zimbauer.
Well, I'm really going to light everybody's hair on fire
Oh,
now.
boy.
So, make sure that I have some clarity on this. And this whole discussion we're having is exactly why I've advocated that we need an arborist on staff at this county to make these decisions so staff.
In the budget.
Yeah, we're hiring them.
We do have arborists, certified
Understood.
arborists on staff, and they're in other areas, but we bring them in as we need them, but we do also have a natural resource officer.
So
in the
that
budget.
they can help in this example like Commissioner Lockhart has given. Hey, it's hitting my pool, it's uprooting the foundation. What is viable for her situation? Is that 8 trees that are 3 inches diameter, or is it really 1 or 2 trees? I don't know that answer, but an arborist would tell us, because here's the problem. Any arborist will tell you there's a benefit to thinning the forest. And by thinning the forest, you make other trees healthier. You clear the canopy. You can have historic trees or specimen trees that are actually overtaken by faster growing trees that don't allow other trees to actually mature. And the canopy gets so full, sunlight can't even hit them. So the real question is, I have 7 acres in the rural area, fully treed. I want to go in and build a house. I want to clear 3 acres for horse pasture. What happens?
So in a scenario like that, currently, it depends on if it's a single family.
It would be single family.
Then it's
I'll build a single house,
Basically-
with a barn, with a pasture.
we wouldn't be able to regulate that under current state statute. So it's basically, you would go and you would hire an arborist to say that, this is a tree that is dangerous to or interrupting my property and my decision, and you could do what you want. That's my understanding.
I think the statute says dangerous. You may have an agricultural exemption, which is different.
Well,
but
no,
that scenario,
no,
but-
because there is no ag exemption for a private citizen who goes and buys in my district acreage and wants to build a single-family home, put a barn on it, fence in an area for a pasture, that's not an ag exemption. In order to get an ag exemption, you have to be running a business.
Well, and I don't, maybe we can clarify through land uses and zoning, if you have a rural zoning district, that would cover everybody on the east side. I think,
Because that would be a cost prohibitive scenario and
Well, and
defeats the whole purpose of why we have large tracts.
Well, it defeats the purpose of having pasture, but I would agree with you on that. Perhaps, and I think that can be addressed by addressing zoning districts where you can actually do that, which are rural districts. So we can address that, I think, probably through this issue of if you're on rural land, there are opportunities when you can do that. I think the point of the proposed revision was to address concerns that were raised at previous work sessions about protecting specimen trees. You could sort of split the baby here and reduce. We have an exemption for 5 acres or less, which means people can clear a lot of trees on 5 acres. Even if you have a single-family home, you got a lot of stuff where you could be clearing. Maybe you reduce the exemption to 2 acres, but you take out the sentence about the specimen trees, so that you're exempt. If you're 2 acres or less, you're exempt, no matter what.
And I think we're getting a little bit into the weeds because we're doing one thing was when when there's property that's going to be developed, like a development. That's what we were talking about here.
That's what I was getting ready to say.
We've gotten into single-family homes and what happens with homes. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I'm just saying that we've done, and to your point, Commissioner Zimbauer, I had an oak tree, middle of the backyard. It was decaying, moss was all over it, saw it, called Altamont Springs, live in Altamont Springs, arborist came over, yes, take down the tree, boom, 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 So I understand what you're saying, but I think there's 2 distinct things here. One, when a person's coming in and doing a developable land and all of a sudden says, okay, I've got to, and I don't want to use the word clear cut because Commissioner Herr is absolutely right. You want to make sure that the topography and the geography and making sure that you have that you've taken care of drainage and everything, but comes in and all the land, yesterday treed, tomorrow no trees. We were talking about that one thing. Maybe we need to make sure that we're separating the 2 and discussing the 2 at different times. So let's talk about land that, if we can, land that is coming in and the development wants to build on that land. Let's talk about that. What happens today? What happens with this change in the regulation?
Can I just,
Yes, go ahead, please.
we're this far down the road on the single family. If
You want to
we
do the single
abandon-
family first?
Can we
Okay,
finish
let's-
that and then
please.
change
Great.
it?
Well, we went turn over to the single
In the
family.
interest of saving time.
Yeah, let's do the
Great
single
idea.
family then. Whatever.
You can high five
Let's
me.
get it.
And just, and if it's okay, if I can interject really fast, the exemption for the 5 acres is under section 60.2, and it's under the scope for the arbor. And it says, and this is the current code, it says, the terms and provisions of this chapter shall apply to all real property lying within the unincorporated areas of the county, except as to those properties exempted from regulation by the county pursuant to section 163.3162 and 823.14 Florida statutes, and except as to developed single-family lots of 5 acres or less. So developed single-family lots of 5 acres or less are exempt from the Arbor Code ordinance completely.
Currently.
Currently.
Got it. So I appreciate you all letting me go down that rabbit trail, because I think even though it's in the weeds, I think we're creating the weeds, and so we need to understand the weeds, because someday a citizen is going to have to come back.
Apparently, it's me. We've identified the problem, it's me.
Okay.
Because someday, we're going to have a citizen standing here in front of us appealing something that we created, and we're going to say, well, wait a minute, we didn't know that was going to happen. So I do think it's worth the time to do the devil's advocate on what could potentially happen. I also think, I know all of us have larger residential lots in our districts that aren't necessarily rural. My Lazy Acres Lane area is
Right.
full of large lots that are low-density residential, but they're big 5-acre-plus lots. So I want to just make sure we tackle that. Also, just as an update, the girl child has texted me and said, please don't take down that tree, that's my favorite. So I think the tree will probably stay. Daughter bats her eyes and daddy listens, so that's good.
All right. So we're trying to deal with single family now. So where are we?
So back to the language that we had before, when there's either a site plan, a development that requires a site plan approval or in the subdivision regulations. So I believe what you're talking about is site plan approval, and it's a little, I don't have the research or the knowledge of your code at this point. I've been focused on the Arbor ordinance. I don't know where that threshold is that requires site plan approval. But anything that requires site plan approval, yes, would be subject to the regulations of this code, of the Arbor ordinance.
Correct. So so going back to like what we were just talking about, my recommendation is on this proposed G, if we don't want to include any additional protections for specimen trees, that we delete that section entirely and not propose that change, and then maybe just revise 60.2 if there's interest in changing that from 5 to 2 acres. That would be my recommendation on that portion of it. But then in terms of the actual development of new development on vacant property.
Yeah. Well, let's, wait a minute.
We're talking about existing single-family, or are we talking about
Yeah, we're talking about
new
existing, now we're
single-family?
talking.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I was just trying to summarize the existing single-family and what my recommendation would be for that.
So is everybody okay with going to 2 acres? I am.
On existing?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, okay. I see a consensus there. Now, the second question is, Commissioner Lockhart wants to protect her tree, but at the same time, she wants to get rid of it. So,
When you're married, you compromise. We can't fix that.
But the question is now, but since we got a real-life application here, all right, so let's say that eventually she wins, her daughter loses, and they want to get rid of the tree, okay? Now,
She's exempted.
Should be exempt.
she would be exempted on a specimen tree, because it is a danger, not a danger, what's it called?
No, she's exempted on everything.
Okay.
Under what Rebecca just suggested, any lots 2 acres or less,
So
exempted on everything.
then I'm trying to get this narrowed. So my question is now, do we want to put in any, protections that it has to be a danger, or what was the other word that you used for this, with the
The statute says danger.
Okay, that, to life, to property and person. Do we want to put that in? That's the question.
On the 2 acre?
On the 2 acre, on existing single-family homes, because you just suggested to take it out.
So the question, yes, and so I guess that's the policy direction we need from the board. Do we just want to?
That's why I'm trying to get to it, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So, please, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think the question is now, do we want to say, okay, here's the 2 things. Right now, Commissioner Lockhart, under the statute, or under our ordinance, can take out the tree, nobody knows. It's a specimen, let's assume it's a specimen tree. I'm sorry, you brought it up, we're using you.
Yeah,
So now we've got the specimen tree. Do we want to put in a protection that it has to be a danger to property or person before she can take it out? That's basically.
I don't have a problem with that. I
That's
think
the
most
basic
people
question.
don't want to take it out unless it's bad anyway.
Doesn't that just revert it back to without the exemption?
Well, that's what
We've
I'm trying.
exempted properties under 2 acres, except we're not going to exempt them, is what I'm hearing. I'm
Other
saying I
specimen
disagree
trees.
with it, but
That's what I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to focus this in on, because we've gone all over the place here. I'm trying to focus in. That's what Rebecca is asking direction for, okay? Go ahead, Rebecca, please.
So I think the distinction is, do we want to, for properties either 5 acres or less or 2 acres or less, do we want to exempt them for all tree types?
Yeah.
Or do we want to exempt them for all trees except if it's a specimen tree or historic tree, then they would have to demonstrate that it's a danger to property or persons?
And that's what I've just said. We agreed to go to the 2 acres. Now the question is, do we want to have the protection for the historic/specimen tree?
Yes.
Okay. We have 1 yes. Commissioner Herr?
That is what this says.
That's exactly what it says,
Pretty
because of the
much.
however.
Okay, and that's what I'm saying. Do you want that or not? Commissioner Delory?
I'll keep it the way it is for now.
So you want to keep it? Okay, Commissioner Lockhart?
I think we should keep it the way it is for now until and unless we can figure out how we're actually going to permit. And I don't like the idea of someone tattletaling on someone after the fact. We don't have anything in place right now that people who, this goes back to communication. If we're going to make this big of a change in our code that is now going to require people to get arborists out there to certify that trees are whatever, I think it's a huge cultural shift for a county of 500,000 people to suddenly determine whether they're under 2 acres, and I think it's a bigger change than we can make at this point in time, personally, as a community. I just don't think
But yet of those
it's where we wanna go.
500,000, there's only 180 some that fall under our
Well, that's still
control.
a ton of people.
No, understood, but it gets back to the argument of, and I think we all in this room understand, we don't have the tree police running around.
No.
We don't have anybody on staff that drives around every day going, hey, there used to be an oak tree in that guy's front yard. It's just like code enforcement. So how does one know? Okay, how does one know that Commissioner Lockhart may cut down a tree or not?
But it's not, it shouldn't, so this is where this philosophically hits me every single time, because even if the tree wasn't pushing up the pool, and I decided I wanted to take it out because I wanted to put in a patio there,
Right.
I should be able to do that on my property. And I shouldn't have to necessarily replace trees because I already have a ton of other trees on the lot. So I just feel like we're creating something with this that is doing a one-size-fits-all blanket approach. And unless there are some exemptions for how many caliber of tree you already have on the property and how big the property is already, I think we're creating a monster.
I think we've got one already, Commissioner.
That's probably true. My hesitance with the answer is that when you take these decisions in isolation, do I want people to keep specimen trees on their property?
Of
Yes.
course.
Yes, the answer to that is an easy yes. Do we currently require permitting, et cetera? Can we manage it as it is written? I doubt it. Are we creating what I would call road noise within our own community by virtue of what we're doing and how we're doing it? Yes. So I am perfectly willing to consider rules that would help us keep trees on the earth. That's the goal. But I would also want them to be easily interpreted, easily administered by our current staffing levels, which is a whole nother topic of conversation. Regardless of the fact that we hire an arborist or we have them, we may not have the capacity to do this. And if we don't, then let's not set something up that puts a citizen through the gambit of running around in circles. That's my mission.
All right, so the only thing right now that I hear that we have when I say consensus, a majority, is to reduce it from 5 acres to 2. Okay, Commissioner Zimbauer, did you want to add to that?
No, I just have another question to Commissioner Lockhart's example. So Commissioner Lockhart wants to take down a tree and build a patio. What happens?
Currently?
Specimen tree.
Yeah.
Currently, I mean, if it
Takes down her specimen oak.
she would submit for her building permit and just show that she was removing the tree, and it doesn't require an arbor permit associated with the building permit.
Does it require her to replant
No.
the same amount of trees?
Currently, no.
Circumference? Okay.
Currently.
And of the proposed from our consultant?
Yes, definitely. If she's going to get a site plan approval, she will be required to follow Chapter 60.
And for the record, would require her to do what?
It would
To remove that 24-inch
Yeah.
circumference oak tree.
So hypothetically, if she's removing the 24-inch tree and there was no definition of dangerous or, ruining your property or things of that nature, you would be required to mitigate for 48 inches because it would be double. So that can be accomplished in a combination of multiple ways, one of which is to replant trees. Another is to show which trees on your site you protected and didn't remove. And then the third last case would be to pay into the tree fund at an inch equivalent or a fine per inch equivalent. All
But-
three of those.
Okay, this is a lot, we're getting down to where we
That's-
understand it a little
that's
bit
why
better.
I'm
Yeah, I
asking the
know.
question. Everybody hears it.
And again, I want to remind it, that's if it is not considered danger.
Yes.
But if it is pulling up her pavers, then that's property, then that would be considered dangerous, so she would not have to mitigate at all.
Correct. However, real careful here. I am not an attorney, and there
I
are
understand.
a lot of very smart people in
This
our
poor guy's
Florida
like,
that are
And
I don't wanna
upset
be
with that
one
language dangerous
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Yeah, we understand.
We're upset with that.
Yeah.
But yes, you would assume that she would be able to show that it's ruining her property, and therefore she should be able to remove it.
So I guess, important point is if it wasn't dangerous or pulling up the pavers.
Right.
And I just wanted to have some more sun because my tomatoes need more sun. I don't know, whatever. Maybe I'm not extending my patio. Maybe I just need more sun on my garden. Or whatever. I love the tree. For the record, I love the tree. So it is, that would be onerous to me in my thinking of a regular old Seminole County family to have to pay to take the tree down, pay the fine, somehow afford the additional trees that you're going to have to buy to pay someone to install them, because Lord knows they're not fitting in the back of the Lincoln. It's going to be a big old deal to have regular old families who just want to use their property for what they want to use it for. And I don't think that's fair.
Can you make a suggestion?
You can make any suggestion
Nancy,
you
can you
want.
make a suggestion?
You have to
Yeah,
take the however out.
Take out the however.
I said that earlier. Do it.
I think taking out the however would be fabulous, but
We went down the ruins.
But I also heard...
know someone doesn't want to take out the
Well, not just,
however.
it's not that I don't want to. I think that there's a lot of howevers within the however. One of them was that you proved that you're protecting other trees on that property. I guess, and I guess my question was, we've got an agreement, I think on the 2 acres from the 5, I think we've got some concerns here that I agree with, that needs to be flushed out and figured out, but I think we've gotten to where we are really not, I believe that there's a lot of wherevers that we could say, or, that we can say are easy to get you out of the circumstances that you feel that you're in.
I just
By
talked myself
protecting your
into.
others, you say you got a lot of other trees on
I
a little
do.
property.
I do.
Then you can just say, I'm protecting these other trees. I'm sorry, I just,
Can I-
yes.
I would just like to weigh in on that comment, because I don't know, I'm not sure what you have in mind about what that criteria is. But that's going to be significant, it's going to take significant staff time.
Yep.
Okay.
I will tell you, from a staff standpoint, our preference would be pick a number, exempt it. If you want to do specimen trees, we could do that, but this idea of if, then, the whole
Right.
Well, that's what-
chart
oh,
thing.
I'm sorry.
I will tell you from an administration standpoint, and I love trees too, but I think you're going to put staff in a difficult position to try to determine, well, are they really maintaining other trees on the property? What's the threshold? I would suggest that you pick something that's pretty
Okay.
clear as to what the standards are for staff and for the residents, so they know what's expected too.
I have 2 commissioners that want to speak, and we've got citizens that want to speak. And, go ahead. I'm going to, Commissioner Hurd, then Commissioner Zimbauer.
So I think when we were going down the dais and taking consensus earlier, I'm not 100% convinced we understood the ramifications. I think if we take the however statement out of this, it's a better scenario. There is an opportunity to flip the paradigm so that we could staff to helping citizens maintain their trees if they want to add an additional patio in the scenario that you described, that somebody can come out and help them investigate. We would actually be helping folks do the right thing as opposed to imposing onerous laws upon them to force them to not be able to use their property the way they see fit. I personally think that's the better way to go. Putting staff in the decision-making process of a subjective decision like that is not a good decision.
Commissioner Zimbauer.
We need to keep it simple on existing homeowners, number one, which then relates to it's keeping it simple on our staff. There's not an easy answer to all of this. All I will say is good portion of our county have HOAs that also dictate what trees and shrubs and fences and color houses can be, and that may be in stark contrast to whatever we do. So keep in mind that if there's a worry that somebody's going to go in and clear cut their entire existing property, I don't see that happening. Notwithstanding, when you get out in the rural area, which is going to be over the 2 acre, I think we just have to keep this as simple as possible for pre-existing residents. If not, it's going to be a train wreck.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think everyone's almost saying the same exact thing, and to sum it up, I think under exceptions under 60.5, under G, I think Commissioner Hurd was talking about this, where it says, however, specimen trees and historical trees identified on lots 2 acres, under 2 acres, shall remain subject to the previous provisions under this chapter. I think for the time being, until we can get better definition, better direction, that sentence needs to be removed until we understand it better.
Okay, I think I've heard a consensus of that, at least 3, that wish to do that, and the fact of the matter is, the direction I think that you're asking for, we've got 2 acres. Take that sentence out, but understand that we are all in this, we all believe that we would like to protect the historic and/or specimen trees, and if you can come up with a better way to do it, or a simpler way, or, as you said, a way that is not going to get us so much in the weeds with the individual citizens, we're willing to listen. Okay?
Fabulous summary.
Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you. So for the direction is, in this case, we won't even need that section G. We'll just, that won't even, in the next draft, that won't even exist. And the scope will change, the 60.2, so that it'll go from 5 acres to 2 acres.
Right. But we're willing to listen to things that you think that could be better protective. Okay? All right, let's go to site plan development arbor discussion. We're still on the trees.
Which I think is what our consultant really endeavored.
Yeah, I agree. We were the ones that got back into the individual.
Sucked them into the
Thank you,
wrong
Amy.
part.
However is a big word.
No, but I appreciate that because we have clear direction now, so it's great. Thank you.
Now we're back to the 75%
Yes.
of the protected trees can be taken out.
If I may just make an introductory comment, is we didn't want to bore you with the same information we shared last time, which was an extensive discussion of everything the arbor regulations do to encourage not homeowners, but developers to maintain trees through the replacement costs, as well as a potential fee that would be set by this board. So in addition to that, we're discussing this requirement of maintaining 25% of the trees. The exception to that, which already exists in the code, we are making narrower. So currently, the restriction is undefined. Severely restricted is undefined. The definition that we're proposing is from the Burt Harris Act under Florida statute, which essentially is an act that would allow the developer to sue you anyway as a taking. And of course, the lawyers can weigh in on this with more specificity, but essentially this language would refer to that language that if the county manager sees that there's a risk that this could be judged as taking, at that point, that they would be able to waive it. So it's a pretty restrictive and significantly more restrictive waiver than what currently exists in the code.
Thank you for that explanation. All right, does anybody have any questions? Can we, I guess we've had, a single citizen waiting patiently about the arbor. I didn't know whether or not it was on local or, guys, please, I've asked you before, I bet you two have yellow slip, thank you. Let's bring them up. Let's not hold them and say who's going to be, let's bring them up, please, guys, in the beginning. Thank you, Nancy, for bringing yours up. You're up.
I took mine in.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
All of you hold them until the last minute, and I've asked you before not to do it. I really would appreciate it.
It's not a for or against.
I understand, but it's still, you want to speak.
Once we know the rules, I'm happy to play by them.
Thank you very much, Joe, and I've told you that before. Okay.
We have trouble keeping up those ourselves.
Yeah. Nancy, please, stay around, guys, because I'm going to call you right up now.
Nancy Harmon, 752 Pioneer Way, Geneva, Florida. This conversation on the existing homeowners was very interesting to me, because we're helping you. We're helping you. Just kidding. But I would say this. Amy, I see her situation and I understand it. I do. I mean, as a homeowner, you don't want your property being destroyed by your nature, and you have to find the balance. But what I'm concerned about in your conversation with the existing homeowner, if the person is the existing homeowner, then I think, yeah, there should be some more leniency there. But if somebody's buying the land, they've just bought this house, say Amy moves out, she sells her house, and these people come in and they say, well, I want a bigger pool, I don't like that pool, and I want to do more things. And if you look, I mean, having now knowledge of her backyard and where it's located, they could come in and take down that tree, the pine tree, and now they've cleared that area, which opens that area up to the question of, well, what if everybody does that? What if every person who bought a home in her development decided they were going to come in, and there's no protection over the trees, and now they want to put in big pools and all these other things? Or the other side of it is they put in the pool, and then they plant a tree beside of it, and now the tree's in the way. I think we, as a county, should be helping people make those determinations with helping them understand, if you plant this tree, so, okay, let me move forward to the new developments. If you plant this kind of tree in the backyards of these properties, recognize that if they want to put a pool in, and we're telling them they can't move this tree, and they put the pool in, they're going to have a problem. Same way with sidewalks. If we tell the developers, you have to put in trees, and I do agree that we should. I agree that we should have tree coverage. I believe that we should keep canopy to protect our environment, because in Geneva, the temperature at my place is usually 5 to 10 degrees cooler than Oviedo and Sanford. And it's because when I drive up my lane, it's canopied. And so to help with the health situations, to help people be able to walk and enjoy the pathways and, all the amenities that go into these new developments, I think it only behooves us to take and ensure we have trees. But on the other hand, we have to do it with reasonableness and with conscious thought. Because we had this conversation about putting in the sidewalks, and all these folks in that one neighborhood who said, wait, I got a tree there. I planted that tree 20 years ago. My kids swung in it, blah, blah, blah. And now you want to take my tree down because you want to put a sidewalk in. So my thought is we definitely need the arbor, but when we're talking about developments and they're clearing land, and because they will clear land, we know that, and we're requiring trees to be put back in, we really need to ensure that the trees don't go on the sidewalk, which we see in this RPF or whatever that design is. to me, I think we need more work. I guess where I'm coming from is, I don't even think we're halfway through with this. I think there's got to be much more thought about it. And when Nicole's talking about staff, the more thought is going to take the burden off staff if we can articulate better and show pictures that get attached as, here's an example of, in our code, in our LDC. Pictures speak a million words. So that's just my input. I mean, I'm not ready at this point to say if you were going to put this on a vote, I would say I can't even understand where I'm going with this. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shaddix?
Katrina Shaddix, 1133 Covington Street, Oviedo, Florida, 32765. I'm with Nancy. It's totally confusing to me. Nothing is clear. I do like Commissioner Constantine's comment at the very beginning that it's okay we're going to let developers destroy 75%, and pat ourselves on the back for not allowing clear cutting, but then give them the chance to apply for a permit to destroy the other 25%. And the whole point of, giving them the option to pay for their environmental crimes is a no-no. They shouldn't be able to pay their way out of this because they will. They have the finances to pay for the destruction that they will do if allowed to do it. So I think this needs a lot more work. I think we need to realize that cutting down all the trees in one area and planting them somewhere else 50 miles away in a mitigation bank is very harmful. I had a hydrologist that testified in one of the developments in Orlando where they clear-cut the entire Little Wekiva headwaters. And he said the mitigation system is a sham. It's like taking your heart out. We're going to take the trees out here and putting your heart behind your knee. It doesn't function. The trees need to function in the spaces that they are. Ecosystems cannot function if we take out the majority of them and plant them somewhere else. And if you know, a very infamous mitigation bank happened here in Florida, just in the next county. Developers were required to pay millions of dollars to preserve the Farmington Mitigation Bank. And now that was approved by Volusia County Commissioners to develop 40 to 60,000 houses in a mitigation bank. So eventually, the mitigation banks disappear. So I would just recommend taking out the part, giving them the option to pay for destroying the trees and do a lot more work on this. I'm confused like Nancy is, but I appreciate y'all taking the time to do this. I think it's a good start, and I'm happy to help in this process going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've seen that all of us are confused. Ms. Rodriguez?
I'm just happy nobody has a problem with the longleaf pine. Thank you.
Good morning. Natalia Rodriguez, 362 Seminole Avenue. All right, let me just get right to it. I am here not only as a lover of trees, but also a graduate student who has dedicated the greater part of my professional life to the study and education of trees, regenerative forestry, and the relationship between trees and their communities. While 75% sounds like a big number in reality, you're only making a point to save 25%, and that's quite a meager number when discussing such an essential part of the health of our community. I know many of you already know this, but it bears repeating. Right now, many of the trees that are set to be cut down for development are the very trees that function as nature's perfect stormwater retention systems and nature's perfect soil erosion prevention systems. There's much value to be had in old-growth trees. These trees should be looked at as supercomputers that have the knowledge of time and experience under their canopies. These trees provide the answers for blights and funguses already fought, droughts and fires, storms and insect invasion. Furthermore, the average tree that provides the most benefit to a community takes about 100 years to reach maturity. The fact that this ordinance is basically giving the developers the opportunity to clear-cut these important trees with the option of paying a fee or planting baby ones is a ruse. This is all semantics, which provides new, fancier verbiage and more loopholes to climb through. There's no solid protection for the very things that provide us as humans and our communities so very much. In today's climate, I'm unclear as to why we as a county cannot set harder lines and enforce stricter policies for the health and benefit of the greater good. It seems that these current ordinances are in place to appease the average citizens and give leeway to developers. The current culture of giving developers more than the citizens who are speaking up needs to change. Trees are much more than the beautiful structure that provides shade. Their value to the environment is paramount to the health of our soil, and most especially our bodies of water, who I know you're all also very aware are in dire need of our help. Mr. Zembar, or Commissioner Zembar, I wanted to comment on your statement that thinning trees is healthy. Yes, from an agricultural standpoint and from the perspective of someone who values trees by the amount of money they can make from them, you're right. The practice of thinning and clearing certain trees is an effective way to ensure your trees for timber to grow strong. From a perspective of a forest regeneration and conservationist, trees rarely need our input to maintain their health and survival. In fact, the more wild a tree and forest is allowed to be, the stronger and healthier they are. And in return, the stronger and healthier the surrounding soil and water is as well. Commissioner Lockhart, to your comments about making too big of a culture shift by enforcing more protection for our trees, which if you're paying attention, the majority of our citizens are sick, absolutely sick of the complete land conversion that is currently allowed. A complete shift is exactly what this county needs. That's exactly what your constituents voted you into a position of power for, to make these big shifts in the right direction. Furthermore, property rights should only go as far as they affect the greater common good. Okay. Well, thank you.
Close it. Thank you very much, Ms. Rodriguez.
For clarification, since my comments were called out, I was talking about existing homeowners and the situation of existing homeowners, not new development.
Yeah, we're right now, we're finished existing, we're still talking about, and I thought most of you wanted to talk about development. So, Mr., I always call you Commissioner Humphreys. Mr. Humphreys.
So you pointed at me, sorry.
Joe Humphreys, 883 Cardinal Point Cove, Sanford, Florida. Yes, trees' lives matter. I think they matter to this county. Having been in sales and marketing for a long time, I look at logos. That's the number one sales tool for this county, and it's blue and it's green. So, and that picture right there, that's my neck of the woods. Commissioner Zembar is probably familiar with that location. That's Markham Landings on Markham Road that came before him on the P&Z. I worked with the land manager for Standard Pacific, who was the original developer, and also Mr. Madden. And as it currently stands, most of those lots surrounding Markham Landings are 1 to 3 acre properties. Now, in my conversations with the boards at Heathrow and Lake Forest, as Mr. Zembar pointed out, you don't cut down a tree without permission, and if you cut down a tree, you put one back in its place. And it's very, 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 in some cases, egregious. So there is indeed a lot of existing controls in a lot of communities. Now, in my subdivision, which was developed by White Sands, somebody that's been involved in development in this community for a long time, those are 1 acre lots. Mine's slightly over an acre. And our HOA rules are very bare bones. Tomorrow morning, every one of my neighbors could get up under the current rules and cut every one of those trees down, including the specimen trees that I have on my property that are anywhere from 100 to potentially 300 years old. That's not why I bought that property. Do I have issues with the trees? Yes, I just spent $5,000 doing maintenance. But I don't have problems during hurricanes when we don't. Now, I've talked with Norm, who's the executive director of the Florida Institute of, or International Society of Arborists, as to the new state regulations. As he said, there's very little case law at this point. In fact, there's a lot of confusion about it. But at the end of the day, he says it's not nearly as egregious as people are indicating. And as I read documents from Hillsborough County this morning, they said, yes, we can't prevent you from going in and taking out a diseased tree, a problem tree, as determined by our arborists. But it doesn't mean that you can just willy-nilly go in and cut every tree down on your property either. So there needs to be clarification. We need to be careful about the words of the statutes because they are new and they are not preventative. And as they point out, it does not eliminate the ability of the county to regulate. I'm more than happy to have the county regulate my 1 acre lot, and I can tell you, speaking as the vice president of my board, that everybody else in the community concurs with that. Yes, as to clearing 75%, I think that's an egregious level, given the fact that I can, as a developer, can always come back and ask for more. So I would urge you to reconsider that number. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Let's try to get through this before lunch. So we are now on, we've discussed the single family.
Mrs. Melch.
Okay, Ms. Milch, I'm sorry, I don't have it. But I'm sure it's over there, and I'm sure you put 2 things on it, didn't you? Okay, I gave it to them already on the other one. I apologize. So go ahead, Ms. Milch.
Thank you. Gabrielle Milch, 252 Coble Drive, Longwood, Florida. So first, I'd like to let you all know I used to be the urban horticulturalist for the county, and we had many people come in and ask about diseased trees. And I actually worked for an arborist for a short time, and it was really rough work. And we worked in the Heathrow community, and they were having difficulties with the sidewalks and the streets and the placement of the trees and all of those in an existing neighborhood. And that was in the right-of-way. So right-of-way, power line easements, and trees that are placed between the street and the sidewalk. In my neighborhood, Wekiva Hunt Club, there's 2,600 homes. We have a lot of trees. There's always continuing problems with these trees. I've seen areas where they planted live oak trees in the middle of a small single-family lot, and the driveway goes up, the floor of the house goes up. So in single-family existing houses, that is problematic. In new development, the development process that I understand is that the development community goes in, they do a tree survey, they look at it, and they decide how many buildable lots they want, and then they decide, okay, that tree's in the way, that tree's in the way, that tree's in the way, and they go for it. So in your proposed code, which was surprising to me, you all, in 60.9D in the section. So in 60.9D1, it says, replacement of non-specimen trees shall be based on a 1-to-1 ratio of the cumulative DBH of the tree to be removed and the cumulative caliper of the tree to be installed. For example, one 21-inch DBH tree to be removed shall be replaced by 7 3-inch caliper trees. So that explains your situation in that. So, but in 9D, it says no applicant may be required to replace more than 90 caliper inches per acre for each development approved or permit. So when you have a 10-acre lot, or I say 600 acres, and you are going to put in a subdivision, this makes, I went through the scenario with my husband, I'm a little confused now, but you only have to replace per acre 9 trees. So if the whole 1-acre lot on a new development piece of land has trees on it, if you take them all out, you only have to replace it by 91 is your cutoff, 91 inches. So that goes into the trust fund. And I read further to try to find out where this trust fund was and what was the allocation, how is it set up, and what does that money go for? To buy new trees, to plant, and where? I think that a part of the arbor regulations should at least define, your tree bank and know where the money's going to go, and then have a plan to, represent it. And this pay-to-go, I'm sorry, a lot of people, frugal, whatever, they decide that they, don't want the tree. They'll pay an arborist, whether he's ISA approved or just Joe on the street, to write a little note saying, oh, that tree's diseased. I'm not the judge of that. That's a difficult one. Staff doing that, you have, if you get the new arborist, in position here, that would be awesome. But Extension Office could also help with some of that in some respects, maybe not today. So you did say that permits required. So the permit process alone is kind of confusing to me with the existing, when you come in for the development to come in. So compaction of the soil, protective tree fund, shall or should. Existing trees should be considered because of drainage. If you want to go low-impact development, that's an important factor here. So I just hope that I would like to hear more about the Arbor Tree Fund and have an explanation of what the 90-inch caliper restriction is, so the developers don't have to pay more than 90 inches per caliper per tree each.
Thank you, Gabby.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Commissioner Hurd.
I actually think we need to clarify for the record that it says no applicant may be required to replace more than 90 caliper inches per acre. So it's not simply 90, because the 10-acre example, it's 900.
Well, and I also think you should read the rest of that sentence, which says
Right.
if they've demonstrated that they've
Exactly.
planted as many trees as possible. So there's.
What we're learning is nothing is ever simple. Commissioner Zimbauer.
So, it's a lot of ground, there's been a lot of things said. I don't think it's ready for prime time. I think it needs a lot of work. I want to know what we're going to do when Hurricane Charlie comes through in my place in Chuliota and took out 300-plus trees. What do we do then?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, if we're going to,
Clean them up.
You mean, are you going to have to replace them? Is that
Correct.
what the question is?
you're going to have that question
Rebecca.
come up.
You're exactly.
Like the two trees that fell on my property yesterday. Do I have to replace? No.
So, but wait a minute.
Is E.
But when that happens, in my case, that was slash pines and some longleaf, but scrub oaks and so forth. You basically, once you clean it up, you've got a clear cut. So now what are you going to tell the neighbors? And what is this county going to do? Say it falls under natural disaster? And then who regulates, was it really a natural disaster, and how many trees really were damaged in the storm? And my point being is, we're going to have to find a simple, easy-to-follow path, because there are so many exceptions, there are so many different scenarios, that if we get too complicated, we're going to find ourselves in the bushes. And I think what I'm hearing some of these citizens say is that if we're going to talk about new development, we all believe that trees should be saved and trees should be planted. But if you're going to replant inch for inch what's there, then you get a piece of property that's not usable. Then what do you do? Is that a Burt Harris Act taking? Are we putting an onus on that property owner to the point where they can't build on it? So again, I think we have to find a happy medium and strike a balance of
And Commissioner
the
Zimmer.
property rights
Yeah.
versus having the trees and the right trees and so on and so forth. So I don't think we're ready for prime time on this.
Well, I think, and that's what we're trying to do, obviously. And, you know, when we talked about your trees, you know, with Hurricane Charlie, we're going back to individuals again. I think we've already told them that we need, number one, the only thing we did come to consensus with is the 2 acres. The rest of it is we want to protect the trees, but, you know, we got to find a way that's, you know, that people can deal with when it comes to historic and specimen trees. We're back to the development, though. Does everybody like the 75%?
I'd like to have some more examples. I mean,
Yeah, because as I said before, I think that is, you know, a little bit too much when we're talking about protected trees. But, you know, and then they can go and ask for more. I think the question is, you know, what would be the right number? And then they can come in and ask for more if, under the circumstances we were talking about, that they need.
Well, I think it's going to vary.
It is.
Parcel to parcel. I
It
mean,
is.
if you're going to tell somebody it's got a bunch of scrub crepe myrtle trees across 50 acres because it used to be old cattle grazing land or whatever, that they can't take that off, I mean.
But Gabby made a very good point, where to say, you know, when you're doing the site plan, you want to make sure that those trees aren't going to be in the sidewalks, they aren't going to
Of
be in
course,
the utilities
right.
and all the other things, you know, as you're going back and asking them to replant the trees. Okay, Rebecca, we're in the forest right now. I'm sorry to say that, but we are. I mean, do you got anything right now, what direction are you looking at on lands that being developed?
Sure. So currently, there are regulations in the site plan regulations which require that a minimum of 25% of the existing trees be retained on site unless they can demonstrate that would make the site severely restricted. We don't have standards in the code or a definition of what severely restricted is, so then it was put on staff or the planning manager specifically to make a very subjective determination, and a lot of times the exception has become the norm. So we're hoping to revise that existing language so that it is from severely restricted to inordinately burdened, and then it be consistent with the Florida statutes requirement. And we are trying to strike a balance within the code, because these sites are coming in to be developed, and especially for non-residential, sometimes there's limited space that they're dealing with. So if we have at least a minimum requirement, and then also the ability to request waivers, that does strike a balance. And as Greg was saying, if you have the larger tree that you have, it becomes more and more painful to eliminate or cut down those trees. So the code encourages, through regulation, to retain the larger trees and to retain as many trees as possible, because we do require replacement. And if you can't replace it on site, then you have the ability to pay into the Arbor Fund. Currently, the Arbor Fund is only set up for actual violations of the Arbor Code. However, we have utilized it in plan development situations. So we're revising that so that the Arbor Fund can be used in other circumstances as well. And so, since the site plan regulations already have that currently, what we're proposing then is to add those regulations also to the subdivision regulations, because they're not currently there. There is no minimum tree save requirement in the subdivision regulations. And of course, the other issue is if we do say, okay, you have to keep 50% of the trees on site, just hypothetically, then you would have a subdivision that may end up having to keep trees on lots, and then once those lots are built on and occupied, then those trees are no longer protected, since they would be exempt under our Arbor Code if they're less than 2 acres.
Yeah.
So you missed out on the replacement on that.
No, absolutely. I mean, it comes back down to, if we have a property owner that has hypothetically a 1 acre lot that's zoned commercial and has right smack in the middle of it 2 granddaddy oaks that are 300 years old, what do we do? Does the county need to write a check and buy the property? Or do they have the right to develop their property as it's currently zoned and either plant upon that property or pay into a tree fund? I mean, there's so many examples that are endless that we've got to strike a balance that balances what we desire and the community wants, as well as the property rights aspect of the issue. And as the county manager points out, you can do these things on a developer, but soon as that home is built upon it, now the homeowner falls under the other criteria, and they can cut the tree down anyway. Whether they would do that or not is a whole different ballgame. But the other issue, as I think Commissioner Herr brought up earlier, is so many of these properties, especially along the Lake Mary, Celery Avenue, in our adjoining districts, many of those are old farming lands that have either no trees on them or they have scrub on them now. What do you do with them? Are you going to say you don't have any trees, but you got to plant trees? But you get into the whole raising of the property and movement of dirt to control drainage, because you got to control the drainage on site, which does impact some existing trees with the grading. So I don't know that we have an easy answer, but
Commissioner, yes.
I would like to just clarify one thing for the record. This concept of going beyond 75% or whatever the percentage the board lands on, if an applicant can demonstrate that they are inordinately burdened, we're subject to that anyway. It is a Florida statute. There are provisions in the statute that give property owners that protection. Anyway, we are subject to that. What we're proposing to do, and I think it's a good suggestion, is replace our sort of subjective language with a defined term from the statute that we're subject to anyway.
right.
And that the term inordinately burdened means imposing a government regulation that impedes with reasonable investment-backed expectations of property. So everybody knows what that is, and that's.
Right.
But we're subject to that anyway, so I just want the record to reflect that this is not something new that we're imposing on the county. We're simply suggesting that you replace a subjective standard with the standard that's in the statute.
And with the I'll get to you in a second. With the creative mind, the collective creative mind of this commission, we seem to find every exception, okay? Instead of the 99% norm, okay? And in the 99% norm, I'm trying to find what the right number is, and then if it was inordinately burdened, they can get less. And I just felt that 75% was a little bit too much flexibility I respect what the staff is trying to do. They're trying to come up with a balance. And as the county manager said, above and beyond that, if they can prove that they're, inordinately burdened, then they can come in and they can do more. And we can find every single, really our creative minds can come up with every single different scenario. But let's try to stick with the 99% norm right now, and hopefully that is, we can come up with something here, because we really are trying to answer every question, every single question. Commissioner Herr?
So there's two things. One is that we're going from 100% to 75%, so I think that's a big jump, and it would be good for us to be able to manage it at 75 before we get more aggressive about it, figure out we can't manage it, and then just like the rest of society have this pendulum swing all the way back, and that's just not a way to run a community. I would also like to point out that we are on slide 6 of a 32-page deck that the consultant was ready to come and talk to us about, and we're already debating slide 28, I think. And so I think one of the reasons why we get sideways in decision-making is because we don't actually allow the experts to speak. We become the experts, and the audience becomes the experts. And I love the audience participation and the input, and I do read it all, and I listen to it all. but the consultants need the same weight.
Anybody, Commissioner Zimbow?
In the interest of moving along, if you just do some quick calculations on a quarter-acre lot, and you take into consideration the house pad, the driveway, the mailbox, the pad for the air conditioning unit, and so forth, I think 75% is where you're at. Close thereabouts.
Probably why the experts suggested it.
Well,
Yes, go ahead.
in these two code sections wouldn't apply to the individual building permitting of the lot, which currently our code says you can remove trees within, any of the buildable areas of the lot.
What I'm saying is if you take 100 acres, and they're all quarter-acre lots, and you run some quick math, just saying.
Does the experts have anything else to say, please?
Just a couple things to add in terms of the ordinance itself. The 75% and the 25% numbers that we're talking about, the county already had those numbers in two different places in the ordinance. It really didn't have anything to do with the Arbor ordinance that we're discussing now. The clarity, we think, is important as we were discussing all of this language. I do want to address one thing that was said about the burden in terms of the staff. One of the things that we tried to do with this ordinance is that we actually tried to give more tools to the staff and put some of that burden on the developer. So for instance, the requirement of having a tree survey is new. Documenting where the trees are, having all that information, and doing the calculations is put on the burden of somebody else. And so that's a level of additional information that wasn't currently required. And I want to go back to the penalty as well. It's up to this board to decide what that penalty will be. We're recommending that it's much more stringent and much larger than what it is currently written in the ordinance. And you can see that in the strike-through. It's minimal, and it should be much more stringent.
Thank you very much. All right, I think we've reached a place where we need to take a break. We're going to, if it's all right with the rest of the commission, we're going to stop here. We'll come back at lunch. We'll pick up where we left off. We do have a very light agenda, hopefully this afternoon, as far as the regular commission meeting, so we'll just continue to go into the work session. Yes, ma'am, I see your hand up. Did you have?
1:30.
Okay. Once again, would people please bring up their, okay. Come on, please, ma'am, come on up.
Oh, while she's coming up, I just want to clarify, we're going to pick up this specific discussion when we get back, because I don't know that staff has gotten kind of direction as to what, okay, so we're not going to move on. We're not going to move on to the next item.
If that's all right, we're going to pick up where we left off, going in, and then we'll go into the regular commission meeting. Please, come on up, ma'am, please, come on up.
Thank you.
Okay.
My name's
And I'm trying not to be, I'm trying to be understanding everybody, but everybody holding their yellow sheets in the back instead of bringing up to the clerk, I don't know that anybody wants to speak, so we're not at school, we're not raising hands. We need to get people.
I apologize. I just found out.
No, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not you, please. I'm just letting everybody know for the sake of
I'm
the
new at
future.
this.
No, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, I'm sorry. All right, I just want to explain the
Name
value.
and address for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry. Michelle Dewey, 202 Sir Lawrence Drive, Sanford. And zip code 32773. I just want you to understand the value of trees. 50% of our country is in serious drought. The trees protect us from us having a serious drought. They replenish our aquifers and the future of a drought here. Consider how long it takes for a replacement tree to grow back. How is biodiversity being replaced here? We and our native species are dependent on the biodiversity, right? It even exists in our neighborhoods, from the fungi beneath the soil to the treetops. Our migratory birds even depend on them. So our trees also hold carbon and methane, so when they are uprooted, all of that is released, right? And they prevent flooding as well. We are talking about, we have control of trees here, not natural disasters. I apologize respectfully. Can the county promote native species of trees? There are small ones that grow maybe 6 feet, maybe 10 feet, as well as the oaks, and they're all very important. How are we going to be protecting our wildlife and our endangered species? How are we doing that every time we cut down a forest? Or we say, okay, you can cut down your oak tree. Yeah, I respect everything. That's not against you. Most species, native species, are dependent on oak trees. They are actually one of the most important species trees that we have. And how are we going to protect our wildlife corridors? If we're putting up a new development, how are we protecting the corridors for these wildlife? How are we protecting our native species? There are rules not to kill native species, but we are killing them every time we destroy forests or take down certain trees. Every ecosystem has its value, so I encourage you to learn about every ecosystem that there is. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Do I need to hand this in?
Okay. We're going to pick this up at lunch. We'll see you at 1:30.
Great.
Get some rush.